Okay.
So, welcome to those in attendance at this remote meeting of the local review body of Aberdeen City Council. Please note that the meeting will be recorded and published online for public access after the meeting. You're also reminded to note that we may have members of the public or press observing today's proceedings. Can I ask those who are observing today's meetings to keep their microphones and cameras switched off throughout? Can members of the local review body leave their cameras on but mute their microphone when not speaking? As the local review body contains quasi-judicial business, members are reminded that they should not leave the meeting during consideration of any of the reviews. This meeting has been convened in response to one time's request for a review of the decision taken by the appointed officer under the Council's scheme of delegation. Members of the local review body have before them copies of the review documents listed in the notice calling the meeting. We'll now pass back to Mrs McBain, to the Assistant Clerk, to outline procedures to be followed in the conduct of these reviews and to take a roll call of all members present.
Thank you, Chair. Members have the procedure note which was circulated with the meeting papers and is intended to set out the wider framework within which the review process operates. The first task for the review body is to come to a decision on whether the review documents contain sufficient information for the case to be determined without further procedure, and by that it is meant without further information or representations. The regulations governing the local review process require that all matters which the applicant intends to raise in the review must be set out in or accompany the notice of review. The focus of the review should be on the basis of what was before the appointed officer when a decision was made, and only in exceptional circumstances will new or additional matters be permitted to be taken into account. The circumstances in which additional matters can be taken into account are set out in the legislation and will be addressed by the LRB's advisors where relevant. This review should take the form of a structured discussion led by the chairperson to consider the matter set out in the notice of review before you, and I would conclude by drawing your attention in particular to points 10 to 12 of the procedure note. If you can just please indicate you're present. Councillor McCrae?
Present.
Councillor Clark?
Present.
Councillor Cook?
Good afternoon, present.
Thank you. Councillor Copeland?
Present.
And Councillor Van Sweden?
It seems Councillor Van Sweden has dropped off the call again. We'll quickly get her to join back in before starting. Doesn't seem like her connection is working. We will probably just begin then, and if
So we'll just proceed with the 4 members.
Yeah. Okay, so turning to consideration of the review in respect of the decision to refuse the application for a detailed plan permission for the redevelopment of vacant industrial site, including the erection of 4 detached houses, associated garaging, car parking, pedestrian access paths, infrastructure and open space. This is at Scotstoun Muir Base, Shield Hill Road, Aberdeen, planning reference 230969. We'll now hear from the planning advisor in attendance, Ms Lucy Green, who will provide us with a brief description of the application proposal and a reminder of the reasons why the application was refused, as well as a summary of the agent's case. I would point out today that Ms Green's attendance to the meeting to provide us with the necessary professional planning guidance because she has not been involved in the early consideration of the review. Ms Green will not, however, be asked to express any view on the merits of the proposed development, and in effect, her role will be a neutral one involving the provision of factual information and guidance only. Ms Green, over to you.
Thank you, convener. Afternoon, members. I'll just share my screen. Okay, so this is a request for review against the application refused under delegated powers for 4 detached houses at Scotstoun Muir Base, Shield Hill Road. And the review's been submitted with all the necessary information within the time limits. And the applicant has indicated that there are no new matters been raised in the review submissions. In terms of procedure, the applicant has expressed the view that the review may proceed without further procedure. So I'll provide some background information to the case and then hand back for members to decide how to proceed. So this is the site edge red, and the OS map just shows the site up here. To the east is the housing development at North Denmark, known as Dubford. And to the south and west is Scottstown Local Nature Conservation Area, which includes Pewinnis Moss. And the buildings on the site are currently in use, although were previously vacant with a former industrial use. And the site is accessed from Shield Hill Road and has rising ground on the south and east sides. As you can see on the OS map, there's the Burn of Munderno to the northwest and Moorland of the Moss to the south and west. And then I have some screenshots from Google Maps. This is the site just here. You can see new housing development there at Dubford and paths that are existing on site. So the site includes the 2 metal commercial buildings, an office building and a porter cabin, and a small shed to the eastern side. And that's a slightly larger view of the site there. And there's a hedge along south of the access, dominated by Escallonia. Runs from the site entrance to the southern boundary, and within the hedge are the 20 young trees growing in a 1 metre strip of soil, with hard standing to the east and a chain link fence to the west. So I'll just point out the shed, the hedge just along there. And then this is a 3D view from Google again, just taken from the northwest. And you can see the topography of the ground on that. And that plan shows the boundary of the local nature conservation area. So the site boundary cuts across here and then up the side of the road. Sorry, point on the map that you're seeing, site boundary is along here. And then I've got some photographs taken from around the boundaries of the site. So that's looking from the south towards the site, bound by the chain link fence. And you can see the buildings on site. And taken from the north, with the site access just towards the right-hand side. And looking straight at the access. And that's another one just slightly further south from the access. Slightly further south again, and again. So that's kind of the corner of the site. And then the proposed site plan. So you can see the 4 proposed houses here, 4 plots, detached houses with garages. Those 2 are attached garages and are detached there. And also on this site plan you can see in pink the 2 metre noise barrier fencing along here and then along there, and the public footpath just outside that between the noise barrier and the road, and then extending up. And these steps are indicated which join with other paths in going to Dubford. And these are cross sections through the site. So section AA, which goes, I don't know how well you can see that, but goes through the site. Sorry, just go back to that slide. So AA goes through the site. So this is the house at plot 2, so cutting through there, and then the house at plot 3 on the bank up on the south side of the site, and then cross section BB through plot 4, just here again showing the ground banking up and this gabion wall along the edge of that bank. And that area of ground wouldn't be part of the residential plot. That would be outside it, although it's within the site boundary. And then cross section CC goes through the garage there. Again, you can see the ground on the east side of the site there. So this is showing visibility splays at the access point and the bin storage, which would be just by the access. And this plan is just focusing in on the area of the site that wouldn't be part of the residential plots. So you can see when I mentioned go through the policies, the boundary of the OP site excludes this area, and it's actually within Greenbelt, but it's not part of the proposed residential plots. And EB is enhanced biodiversity indicated there. And then you can see along the northern edge the gabion basket retainment wall. So this is plot 1, which is the one in the northern corner of the site. Overall height of the house 7.3 metres, and the materials are a natural slate roof, smooth off-white render, natural stone base course, solar panels indicated on the roof, alu-clad windows, timber cladding, and a sedum roof to the rear single-storey element of the building. And that's the floor plans for plot 1. You can see it's a 4-bed house with 2 bedrooms on the ground floor, sitting room, dining, kitchen, and the garage is shared between plots 1 and 2. So plot 2, same range of materials and a slightly smaller house with a slightly smaller annex to the rear. And that's plot 2, just there. And that's the layout plans. It's a 4-bed house. Plot 3, slightly different layout of house with an attached garage, and the entrance is in that section between the garage and the house. So this is plot 3. Entrance in here. It's a slightly larger house type with 4 bedrooms, a snug playroom, and the sitting dining kitchen. Same range of materials as the others, and the height is 7.77 metres. And that's the floor plans for. It says plot 4. Let me just double check. Yes, floor plans are on there. Right, so plot 4. It's another of the larger house types with 4 bedrooms and a double garage, and the same range of materials again, with the same arrangement for the entrance between the garage and the house. So that's plot 4. So you can see most of the rear garden area is here and just here. And then that's a plan showing a wider area for context. So you can see this path coming out of the south end of the site linking into paths within Scottstown Moor. And this shows plan from the tree survey. So 8 trees were surveyed. There were further 12 trees were too small to be surveyed, and all are to be removed for development. So there's a silver birch, 5 maples, a rowan and a willow. 3 of them are in class C, which is poor condition, and the others are in class B, good condition. And they were also assessed for bat roost potential, with none being found. And this is an illustration of the type of fence that would be used for the acoustic fencing. So it has to seal right down to the ground, and the noise assessment requires that it would be at least 2 meters in height. So the reasons for refusal. First reason relates to ecological impact, presence of protected species on the site, and insufficient survey and mitigation details to avoid disturbance by the groundworks. So it's not demonstrated compliance with Policy 4, Natural Places, Part F in NPF 4, and Policy NE3, Our Natural Heritage in the Local Development Plan. And the second reason for refusal is design/overdevelopment. The proposal wouldn't relate well to the semi-rural context and the public road, with the arrangement of the houses resulting in the prominence of screen fencing to the gardens for plots 1 and 4, and acoustic fencing along the road frontage, conflicting with design policies in NPF 4 and the local development plan, as well as landscape policy in the local development plan. So I've just put the site plan in there, just to note the acoustic fencing in pink that's mentioned in the reason for refusal. So the concerns within the report relate to the proximity of plot 1 to the road, and concerns about the screen fencing to the rear garden being alongside the road, and also the orientation of plots 2 and 4. And also concern as the rear gardens are closer to the road with the screening, and acoustic fencing running alongside the public footpath. So I'll just move on to the applicant's case. A couple of slides to cover the points made by the applicant. The proposal reuses a brownfield site which is supported by Policy 9 in NPF 4. It would deliver housing in accordance with Policy 16 in NPF 4 and LR1 in the Local Development Plan. It would deliver a high standard of design in accordance with policies on design in the NPF 4 and the Local Development Plan, and would comply with all other development plan policies. It's further stated that the proposal would comply with the housing land audit, which identified the site with capacity for 20 units, and that all development would be located on the area zoned for housing, with no development in areas of green space network and greenbelt. It points out that Dubford, a major housing development, is directly to the east, and that there's a landscape benefit of removing the industrial buildings and the yard, that the general height and materials are considered appropriate, and there are no objections. it further states that since determination the site is no longer vacant, however, that doesn't alter the planning merits, and points out buildings could be demolished under permitted development without the benefits of the application. Makes the point that the boundary fence should be assessed in the light of the existing fence, the double chain link fence with barbed wire, which is stated as being 2 meters in height. In terms of protected species, it's stated that the survey aligns with guidelines and there's no need for further monitoring, and that permission could be conditional on a species protection plan. Also, that all elements of built development and gardens are on previously developed land, and that wildlife would be used to a regular high level of activity. It points out that planning shouldn't duplicate other regulatory controls, and that in terms of design there's no requirement regarding distance of houses from roads, and the issue is whether residents have a good level of amenity, which the report of handling confirms they would. This fence would be similar to the Type C fence which I showed in the previous slide, and that could be subject to condition. They point out that the site is characterised by proximity to Dubford housing development, and that it's designed with a vernacular approach. That the scope for submission of detailed landscape plans, which could be the subject of condition, and that the sewage pumping station doesn't impact on the garden and is a private matter. So I'll just cover consultations before I hand back. From the roads team, it stated that the footpaths along the site frontage would connect with paths into Dubford and links the public transport, parks and the community with routes to schools through that way. Cycling would be on the road, which is acceptable. That bus stops are 900 metres away with a service every 2 hours, which is not unusual on the edge of the city. The level of parking is acceptable. Electric vehicle charging would be required through building standards, and the junction through RCC process, the roads construction consent. Refuge collection and SUDs are acceptable, and the swept paths for those vehicles are also acceptable. For environmental health, it agrees the findings of the noise impact assessment subject to the mitigation measures being conditioned. Those are the noise barrier of 2 meters, mechanical ventilation, and which would involve a closed window strategy and a glazing spec for the windows. And there's also comment on hours of construction. The contaminated land team also recommend the attachment of a condition for investigation of the ground prior to development. SEPA was also consulted and had no objection. The proposal would avoid flood risk, and there was no objection from the waste team and Scottish Water. A few more consultations. The Natural Environment Policy team pointed out the presence of protected species on and adjacent to the site, and given the nature of development and the extent of groundworks and excavation, they considered that the proposal would have an adverse effect on a European protected species, and that the mitigation measures that have been noted in the proposals are unlikely to be effective. Nesbrek, they have records of European protected species in the vicinity of the site as well. And Bridge of Don Community Council, there was no response, and there are no representations. So at that point I will hand back to members to decide how to proceed.
Thank you very much. We now need to consider whether we have sufficient information in front of us today to take a decision on the application. If we do not feel we have enough information to take a decision, we can request a further written information to be provided, hearings to be arranged, or a site visit to be undertaken. At the moment, I feel that I am happy to proceed, but I'll quickly go around the room. Councillor Cook.
Yeah, me too. I think we've got enough info.
Thank you very much. Councillor Copeland.
Proceed.
Thank you. Councillor Clark.
Happy to proceed.
Thank you very much. As all members feel we have sufficient information, we'll now pass back to Ms Green, who will take us through the relevant policies and considerations for this review. think you're on mute, Lucy.
Okay. Policies noted in the report from NPF4. I've just highlighted the ones that are mentioned in the decision on the application. So just to run through the other policies quickly. Policy 1 obviously means that significant weight should be given to climate and nature crises in any decision. In terms of policy 2, mitigation for the climate crisis, water efficiency and emissions are particularly relevant in terms of that policy. Policy 3, just the sort of outcome aim of that is that the critical role in ensuring development will secure positive effects for biodiversity. Policy 6 on forestry and woodland seeks to protect trees and woodland and for there to be mitigation where trees are unavoidably lost. Policy 8 on the Greenbelt, there's a presumption against development. As we've seen, the area of Greenbelt on the site isn't proposed to be part of the residential plots. Policy 9 encourages development on brownfield land. Policy 12 encourages the reuse of buildings and also relates to the management of operational waste from the development. Policy 13 supports developments where they are accessible by active travel and public transport. And Policy 16 supports new homes on land allocated in development plans. Policy 18 on infrastructure covers the infrastructure requirements for development and provides for use of conditions to ensure the provision. And Policy 20, the outcome of that is, the outcome sought from that, is that communities have access to green space. Policy 22 is against building on flood risk areas or where development would increase the risk elsewhere. And Policy 23 covers the health impact of development, including noise. So just looking at Policy 4 in a bit more detail, this is section F that's quoted in the reason for refusal. So development proposals that are likely to have an adverse effect on species protected by legislation will only be supported where they meet the relevant statutory tests, and if there's reasonable evidence suggests that protected species are present on site or may be affected by a proposal, steps must be taken to establish its presence, and the level of protection required by legislation must be factored into planning and design of the development. Potential impacts must be fully considered prior to the determination of any application. So Policy 14 was also noted in the report of handling, and that relates to design quality in place. So overall, proposals designed to improve the quality of an area and will be supported where, and I've just picked out from the 6 qualities some of the most relevant points. So in terms of healthy, they would support physical health and well-being. Be pleasant, where they would support attractive natural spaces and protection from noise. Connected, so that would relate to footpaths, public transport, and also the pedestrian experience. Distinctive, which supports attention to detail in design, scale, and built form. Sustainable, which supports the efficient use of resources, ensures climate resilience and integration of nature-positive biodiversity solutions, and then that developments are adaptable, so they invest in the long-term value of buildings and allow for flexibility so that they can be changed to accommodate different uses over time. And finally, point C, that development proposals that are poorly designed and detrimental to the surrounding area and inconsistent with the 6 qualities of place will not be supported. So just moving on to the local development plan policies. Again, I've highlighted the ones that are noted in the reason for refusal. The site zoned under policy H1 residential areas, and also the bottom corner of the site is Greenbelt and Opportunity Site 6. So policy H1 notes that residential use is acceptable in principle where the proposal doesn't adversely affect the character of an area. Policy D2 on amenity, so it advocates making use of views. It covers issues like sunlight, privacy and access to open space. Policy NE2 on green and blue infrastructure covers access to green space, and policy NE4 covers avoiding flood risk and also SUDs. Policy NE5 seeks to protect trees and mitigate where there is tree loss. And then policy R2 covers contaminated land. And policy R5 would cover the management of waste from the site. In terms of policy R6, in particular, water efficiency would be relevant from that one. Policy T2 on sustainable transport states that the sites should be accessible by walking and other active travel as well as public transport. And then T3 covers the parking standards. And finally WB3, where development is next to noise generating uses, a noise impact assessment would be required and development would not be permitted without mitigations. So just to show you the local plan map, this is residential areas. So this is the site OP6, and that area of the site, this area is zoned residential. It's overlapping with the local nature conservation site, and then the speckled coverage on both the Greenbelt and the local nature conservation site is the Green Space Network, and this is also Greenbelt as well as local nature conservation site. So the OP6 description says that the site's a brownfield opportunity for residential development that should look to integrate with the neighbouring development at Dubford, that a flood risk assessment will be required, and that ecological surveys to assess the presence and effects on protected habitats and species will also be required. And then just looking at policy D4, which was one of the reasons for refusal, it looks to conserve or enhance existing landscape, mentions boundary features and whether they contribute to landscape character and sense of place. In terms of protected species, this is guidance from Nature Scott on consideration of protected species in development management. So it basically says that the potential impacts of development on legally protected species should be fully considered prior to determination of a planning application. And so at the bottom there, it's in bold, it's important that any licensing issued are considered as part of a planning application to avoid any unnecessary delay to a development proceeding. So finally, evaluation in terms of the development plan, with all applications being treated on merit, and determination in accordance with the policies unless material considerations indicate otherwise. And in this particular case, the basis for the decision, the impact and appearance of the proposed layout, siting and design, including the acoustic fencing, the acceptability of that, and also would there be adequate measures in respect to protected species? Is there enough information for us to know that? So overall, does the proposal comply with the development plan as a whole, or are there material considerations indicating otherwise? And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Do any members have any questions that can be asked in public, or do we want to go to private session to discuss the redacted reports? Councillor Cook?
Most of my questions are going to be in private, I think. But just one I can probably ask in public. Would it be fair to say that the current buildings on the site, which are metal shed and porter cabin, would be less substantial than the houses that are proposed? Sorry, I probably should have given you notice of that question, but I was rereading my notes this morning.
I mean, less substantial in terms of foundations and the sort of connection with the ground. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, I'm thinking heavier. Sorry, the proposed houses would be brick in construction, therefore heavier than a metal shed or a porter cabin.
I mean, I would have thought heavier than a porter cabin, but it's really not my area of expertise. I know about how they look rather than the details of their construction. But
yeah, apologies for not giving you notice of that question. As I say, it just occurred to me when I was rereading my notes.
No worries. Any more public questions, or we're happy to pop into private session at the moment? I think we'll go into private session for questions.
Right, give her 2 minutes. So I'll put the 4 councillors and Laura and Lucy into this room. And then once you're finished, if somebody can message me, and I'll close off the room and it should just automatically take you back.
Okay.
Right, here we go. That should be it. That's it. Okay. So for those members of the public watching, they're just doing the confidential questions in a breakout room, so they'll come back as soon as possible. So we'll just hang fire here. Thank you.
There we go.
That worked
Well
fine. Okay,
Perfect.
I think that's everybody back. Yeah.
Okay, thanks very much, members. Do we have any further questions on the, or any further public questions regarding the site at all? Not seeing any hands there. Okay, so in accordance with the procedural note circulated, the local review body will now discuss and decide the manner in which reviews proceed. I would highlight that all representations relating to the case have been considered and taken into account. Determination on this one, members. I think through discussions in the private session regarding the redacted information and the protected species, I think I would be minded to defer at this point until an adequate species protection plan can be looked at and submitted back to the planning framework. So therefore we know that there's adequate protection around that species site. Any other members wishing to come into this?
Can I ask a question?
Yep.
Given what you said, I'm happy with everything apart from the species protection plan.
Yeah.
Can we, if we agree that that is the only thing that is holding up approval, that we can give officers delegated powers to grant this, subject to that being acceptable? Or does it have to come back to us again to rehear it?
Lucy?
Well, my view would be that it would need to come back unless legal have got anything to add, but it would need to come back to local review for the determination.
Yeah.
Laura, do you have anything on that one there?
Yeah, I think I would be inclined to agree, actually.
Yeah, I would think so as well. Thank you very much. Councillor Cook?
No, just to say, as I said in private session, I totally agree with you. My only concern is the species protection.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Clark?
I'm like John in this one. We'd really need the species protection plan to be seen first and the work done on that before we continue anywhere.
Okay. Councillor Coping, given what?
Yeah.
So happy to put back at a later
100%
point.
on that one.
Perfect, thanks so much. Thank you very much, members. Therefore, we have agreed to defer this at the moment until a species protection plan can be submitted to the planning team, of which we will then be notified and will be called back into a further local review body. Are members all happy to agree?
Agree.
Agreed. Thank you very much.
Agreed.
Thank you. Therefore, the decision notice of that will be sent out to the applicant or agent in the forthcoming days, and hopefully we'll see this one come back soon to us for the final discussions, and we'll see where we go from there.
Edwina, can I just say before you adjourn, it'll have to be the same members again for the rehear.
Yeah, it will probably be yes, because we've heard the rest of the application. So yeah. No worries. We'll note down everyone that's in today, and we'll come back with future dates once the protection plan has been submitted, and we'll see where we can pull together a meeting in the future. Thank you very much, members. That brings us to a close of today's meeting.
Thank you very much.